arranging this session and for Laura and everyone who adjusted their schedule to come today. I had a death in the family and had to go to a funeral last week, but I'm happy to be here today and to have you all with us. So today we're going to be doing an introduction to grant writing, and I have to say that any given grants professional is going to give you a slightly different take on what they think the essential things are, but these are some of the tools that I want to give you today that will help you as you go about researching and putting together your project ideas and actually formulating a plan and writing an application. So we'll get done as much as we can get done today. And you'll be receiving the PowerPoint from Laura as a PDF file. So, you know, this is kind of microscopic, but it's good for you to take notes, and you'll see the screen today. My card is up there. If you want to contact me afterwards with questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So I wanted today first to go over what our goals are for the session and then go into a quick introduction so we know who's here and can tell you a little bit about myself, and then just get right into the program today. So our goals for today are to understand the grants landscape. And what I mean by landscape is where do grants come from? What's the difference between a public and a private grant? Who's eligible to write grants? You know, what are funders looking to do today in terms of investing their funds in projects that benefit the public good and particular populations? We want to learn about approaches to producing grants, having what I call a roadmap, which is how are we going to get from here to there to communicate how important our organization's mission is and what this particular project is going to do to benefit that population, the group, the individuals that you want to serve. There needs to be a process you go through and sort of signposts along the way, and I want to talk a little bit about those roadmaps. And then lastly, we'll get to this at the very end. Sometimes it's a little bit rushed, but it's very important nonetheless, is to appreciate the role of partnerships and sustaining your projects. To write a grant, to get some funds, to do your project and have no vision for how that's going to be sustained or continued, or in what ways you can partner up with another group that shares your mission and concerns to help a certain group or set of individuals. How can we work together to really maximize our resources and to make these projects continue and be somewhat, we use the word institutionalized, which really means just embedded in some way that they'll continue beyond the grant funding, because grant funding is limited. So you're really getting started with grant funding. How are you going to keep your efforts going? So those are really our goals for today. And I'll put this, I want to compete with the artwork up here, but I'll put this right here. So just a little bit about myself. I am currently the manager of the grants office at Bucks County Community College, and I'm grateful for the college for letting me be here today. I've been with the college for about 5.5 years, and previous to that, I worked for the United Way in Bucks County for over 8 years, really concentrating on the money that was flowing from United Way to agencies doing program work and doing their outcomes and accountability, and really making sure those investments were being used wisely and that programs were achieving the goals that they set out to achieve. Before that, I actually worked in Bristol Borough and Bristol Township, working with coalitions that were supporting youth development. So I'm very familiar with the Grundy Library from way back at the beginning of the 2000s when I was down here quite a bit, and partnered with the library on many occasions. My academic background is I'm a sociologist by training, and I have a specialty in urban sociology. I've taught for many years, and I continue to teach at the college a sociology course, so I'm very interested in that topic still, which was the subject of my graduate work. So I come to grants through kind of weaving back and forth through academia and human social services, and I'm very interested in the connection between the two, and I'm really happy to be able to help folks who are doing the work that you're doing, which we'll learn about over the course of the day, to be able to find resources to continue to make a difference in your communities. So with that, I'd like to go around really quickly because we got a bit of a late start. Just give me your name and the organization you're from, or the group that you're kind of interested in working on behalf of. And we'll go around the room, and you can mention what you hope to get out of today. So why don't we start here?
I'm Kathy Shaginaw. I represent a couple of groups, primarily an effort called Cops and Kids, a literacy initiative that has been adopted by the local AUW, American Association of University Women branch. And we're looking to expand our program. And I also do a lot of volunteer work for the American Chemical Society, and I run STEM programs.
Great. Okay.
I'm Connie Bruin. I'm with Kathy also with the Cops and Kids program, which is a children's literacy. We give out books to kids and collect books and give them out to kids in disadvantaged areas, and also run various programs. And we're looking to find resources so we can expand our program.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stacy Dragon. I'm with the Bristol Borough Athletic Association and Bristol Borough Little League, and we're trying to find funding to run additional kids programs, sports programs throughout the Lower Bucks area.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's work our way back and then come back up and go back down.
My name is Andrew McAdams. I'm the Township, Bristol Township Public Works Director. Just been here about a year, looking to find grant money to help with our residents increase stormwater problems.
I'm Gary Stratford. I'm here on behalf of the Council of Southeast Pennsylvania PROACT. We've been in the addiction recovery business for the past, I say business, about 501c3 for the past 44 years. Starting out in Bucks County, now cover 85 counties southeast Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
My name is Jair Brown. I'm here from Bristol Township on behalf of Parks and Recreation. I'm just here to find grant money, to help fulfill kids' needs and everything.
Thank you.
Tim Bryan, I'm the treasurer of the Newtown Chamber Orchestra, and we've had successful grant writing programs in the past. We have someone who's doing it now, but it's the conductor, and he has other things to do. So as treasurer, I'm going to try and take that over from him, and we're focused on increasing tourism to Bucks County, to preserve classical music in the society, to have youth outreach programs for music, because we know that music programs help children in other skills such as mathematics. And so we got someone from STEM here. I can tell her how music can help with mathematics. And presentation of classical music access. There's a lot of people who don't have the funding or the transportation means to get to the Philadelphia Orchestra, and NCO has presented world-known pianists and string instrumentalists and classical singers with international rapport right in Bucks County, and most people don't know about it.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming down, Kathy.
This must be the music table. My name is Pat Stekowicz. My husband John and I are members of the Bucksmont Squires. We're part of the Barbershop Harmony Society, and our funding comes mostly from our shows and performances that we do, but we do a great number of senior events that they don't have any money to fund us, so we do it all pro bono, I guess. So we need money so we can keep going and expand that program.
Right. That's interesting that you all settled and
Yeah, I know.
must have felt the beat, right? Thanks. Okay, thank you. Great.
Nancy Mutnick, and I'm here from Delanco, New Jersey, the library board. And we're interested in developing a program for women released from prison to teach them skills to get work.
Excellent. So reentry.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great.
I'm Judy Gott. I'm with a group called the Friends of Burlington Island, and our goal is to open the island to the public. We meet grant funding to get people to the island and for education, preservation, cultural and conservation, excuse me, activities on the island.
Excellent.
Valerie Heron-Check, Friends of Burlington Island, what she said.
Okay. All right, let's start here and then we'll go back.
Alright, my name is Edgar Hernandez. I'm a veteran, retired, 100% disabled, and I'm trying to get some kind of program and funds to be able to do something with the veterans. There's too many of us, and I don't agree for being drugged up to keep me calm. I have too much to give still.
Thank you.
My name's Dave Cochran. I'm with the Bristol Borough Teen Foundation. We're just looking to expand our operation, looking for funds to do so.
Thank you.
I am Miriam Landis. I'm also with the Bristol Borough Teen Foundation. Fairly new to it, but looks like I'm going to be appointed to do the grant writing. So I'm here to learn.
I'm glad you could come. Thank you.
I'm Sherry Dennis, I'm treasurer for the South Jersey chapter of the American Herbalist Guild. And we're looking to expand our educational programs around sustainable and legal wild harvesting, preparing plant medicines, and working also this year hopefully with Herbalists Without Borders. And so I'm looking to facilitate that with cash.
We all need cash. I'm sorry.
Thomas Harris, I'm with No Longer Bound,
Oh.
which is a prevention organization in Bristol Township. We do predominantly after school programming or anything along that sort in terms of keeping kids away from destructive behaviors. So I'm just basically here to learn as much as I can in the area of gun writing to see if we could further expand the services we already offer.
Way back when I was working in Bristol Township, I worked with No Longer Bound and Miss Martha Miller. I'm sorry?
Miss Martha?
With Miss Martha.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's still
Is she good?
yes.
Good. She's amazing. Thank you for coming. Okay.
Hi, good morning. My name is Weddy Sharif, and I kind of wear a couple of hats like the first one said. My work that I do, professionally, I would say, is I work for a workforce development organization, District 11 in Philadelphia, and a lot of the work that we do is supported by grant funding, and we use that to help community members pursue higher levels of education, training, whatever it is that they're hoping to do. And so I'm a program manager for one of our newer programs that we just started. But in my other life, my other professional hat that I wear is I teach dance, I choreograph, I self-produce productions, and my preference is to work with younger people for the same reason. I've always been an after-school teacher. I've spent many years in academia, many years teaching, and I'm just really, really pulled by the fact that there's just not enough opportunities, either at all or of low cost, for young people that want to pursue the arts. And if your family can't afford to pay for you to pursue the arts, there needs to be other outlets for that to happen. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm here to, it's a joy to do it myself out of my pocket, but I can serve a lot more young people if I have other partners, supporting me.
Great, great. For those who just came in, there's a couple seats up here, one over there. So, thank you. Thank you for coming. Yeah.
My name is Karen Foster. I'm with Briarbush Nature Center and the Friends of Briarbush in Abington Township. We are always looking for grants to fund a variety of programs that we try to run, including caring for our educational animals that we bring to schools, trying to get more programs into underprivileged areas, and provide more programming for children that are special needs.
Excellent. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Claire Walton. I'm with Chester East Side Inc., which is in Chester, Pennsylvania. And we're a social justice organization that works to provide safe after-school, out-of-school time programs for youth and health and wellness nutrition programs for people who are vulnerable. And we're looking for more operating support as well as program funds.
It's very elusive, but there are funders who are interested in that now. Yeah, thank you. For who just came in? Could you introduce yourself?
So, hi, my name is Kate. I'm with the Edward J. Ill Medicine and Excellence Foundation. So we are an organization that provides scholarships to medical students. So yeah, we're out of Lawrenceville, New Jersey.
Thanks for coming. Who else just came in? Hi.
Hi, my name is Brittany McLean. I am actually a part of 3 nonprofit organizations. The first one is Freedom Neighborhood One in the Bristol Township community. We provide mentoring and monitoring to young people, along with mental health services, ranging from just a place for kids to have a safe haven. The second organization is Chosen Causes. It is an organization that is working on confidence coaches and building self-esteem for young people. And the last organization is SEEK, which is a Christian Counseling and Education Network. And they are a mental health agency in Burlington, New Jersey, seeking funding.
It represents a lot of different ways to help in different types of organizations. Yeah, that's great. Did someone come here? Yeah.
I did, and I'm humbled. I was looking for work in the grant writing field. I don't know a lot about it, but I keep seeing really interesting opportunities to work with grant writing for really good causes. So I have an undergraduate degree in English with a writing concentration. So it's like right up my alley, and I just want to hear more about it and figure out
Great.
how to make it into a career.
By the end of today, you might have made some connections that that could really go somewhere. So I'm not sure what I did here. Is this touched, Laura? Yeah. Okay. So go away. Okay. Thank you. One of the reasons why we take the time to do this, and I really appreciate everyone sharing what you do and the important work you do in your aspirations, is that it's important to see the breadth, the breadth and depth of the kind of work that people do in the community and the different areas of need and the different areas of service. And you'll have a couple of opportunities to work in depth in your table work groups to really explore the process of grant writing. But everyone comes at it from a different point of view with the different populations that you serve and the different issues that you're looking at. But I commend all of you for your work and thank you for coming today. I hope that this is valuable for you. So with that, let's move on. So grant writing, we got our agenda. So I like to read this. I found this quote in my office when I first started working at Bucks County Community College. The art and science of, so what is grant writing? The art and science of extracting strictly specified data sets from a conglomeration of abstract verbal universes, distilling said data into highly palatable, user-mandated phraseology designed to elicit a profound sense of fiduciary responsibility and concurrent release of fiscal resources. So if this is what grant writing seems to you right now, that it's about as opaque and hard to deal with as this this very playful but nonetheless daunting quote, hopefully it will be a little bit more transparent and approachable for you by the end of today. So what I wanted to start with is to talk about the different areas of funding, because as you heard today from the fellow participants, that you're all coming from different types of organizations, whether it focuses on medical students or animals or health or after-school programs involving a township, recreation, whatever it might be, veterans. You're going to be targeting different types of funders who are more likely to be providing resources for that area or those areas that you're working in. So it's important to understand the difference between the different funding streams that are available. So I start with external funding, and what I mean by that is public funding from government agencies. It could be federal, could be state, could be a local county, could be a township, a municipality. These are different levels of government. Sometimes the money is passed through, so it could be federal money that's passing through the state of Pennsylvania, or it could be federal money that passes through the county of Bucks or whatever county you reside in. the money that comes from the government is always specified for particular program areas, and often, particularly federal money comes from regulations that come out of legislation. So the lawmakers actually pass bills that authorize funding for particular areas, whether it's the National Science Foundation or whether it's Health and Human Services or the Department of Education. The descriptions of what those funding streams are going to support have to do with really the federal government's agenda for how to help promote these different areas of work in our society. So a NOFA is a notification of opportunity for funding. I don't know what the A is, but they have different names. It could be a request for proposal. It could be a NOFA. It could be they're all, every agency has a different way of referring to it, but it's basically the notice of the funding opportunity, which is connected to some funding that's been enabled by our legislature to be distributed through a grant process. So they're going to tell you exactly what they're going to fund. And you have to find a way to bring your program or your organization into that sphere of really, national agenda or state agenda of social change, and for how that is going to get accomplished. So you need to really study those notifications of funding very closely to see whether you align with what that public agenda is about. Federal, state, local grants, public money is highly regulated. There is very, I'm going to say intense, but it's just very rigid reporting requirements. You have to report on your program outcomes and how you're performing. You have to report on your financial expenditures and to make sure that everything is in compliance with government regulations. For example, if you're buying a piece of equipment over a certain amount of money, you're going to need to get a couple of bids from different vendors to decide which one you're going to go with and spend that public money. So there are requirements that are attached to both how you roll out your program and how you implement it, but also how you spend the money. And usually the way that you communicate in terms of asking questions and getting guidance is with an agency professional, the grants manager that's part of the Department of Education who's assigned to that particular funding stream. They're sometimes called program officers, and they are the ones that you contact and talk with to get your questions answered. Often it's through email nowadays, but sometimes they even send people out to your site in certain grants to do site visits, that kind of thing. So there's quite a bit of, you might want to just say in, lay terms, strings attached to public money. It's public money, it's taxpayer dollars, and you have to be very accountable for how you're spending it and what you're doing with it, and to show that it's been a good investment of public monies. So these are some examples of some public agencies that I've worked with in my travels: the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Department of Education, National Science Foundation. We have a couple of grants at the college through the National Science Foundation for STEM projects. We've had workforce development programs from the Department of Labor, and we get money from the County of Bucks to do some of those workforce development programs, training to get people into jobs. That's more of like a short-term type of training rather than getting a degree. So that is public funding, very useful and sometimes very generous amounts, but it's also requires quite a bit of oversight and coordination and being able to stay on top of all those details. Private funding, usually we think of foundation grants. Foundations could be it could be corporate foundations, like Dow Chemical has a foundation here in Bristol. Our college just got a grant from the Community Advisory Committee at Dow, and they have a particular process. PICO has a foundation that we work with. Merck, Foundations Community Partnership, I'm actually a board member there, but they serve a lot of organizations in the county that help students with special needs and families of students with special needs, and also youth at risk type programs. Independence Blue Cross Foundation, some of the banks have foundations. So the interesting thing about foundation grants is that foundations generally, their board of directors or trustees set a set of priorities that that foundation is really focusing on. And it may have been a family that left money that had a certain interest, say, in open journalism or animal rescue, or who knows what it might be. And sometimes those foundations change their priorities over time. So it's very important to find out what are the priorities of this foundation, what areas do they tend to fund in, and see whether you're a good match for that particular foundation's priorities. Again, nobody wants anyone, either the funder or the fundee, potential fundee, wants to reinvent themselves just to chase the money. Okay, that's not what this is about. But there's some foundations you're just going to have a better match with, and those are the ones you should think about cultivating relationships with. So cultivating relationships, there's going to be someone that is the grant administrator or the program manager of that foundation. And if it's possible to write them, to talk on the phone, to meet with them, it's always a good idea to get to know the funder in some way. And how do you do that? Can you just open up the phone book and call them? Well, they get a lot of calls, so that's tough. But if you can find a way, someone who might have had a prior experience with that foundation, or you look at the board of directors, and I'll tell you in a minute how you can do that. I'm looking at Laura. If you can find some way that you can connect with that organization, a previous group that was funded by them, it really is about, finding out one connection to them. What is that? The six degrees of separation. Is there some way that you can find a way to make yourself stand out so that they answer your call or they answer your email? And ongoing communication and saying, look, we're this group. We're really interested in what your foundation has to offer. This is what we do. Do you think this is a fit? You start having conversations with them if you can, so that they get to know you and they get to know whether, indeed this is going to be a good fit or not. And lastly, foundation grants tend to be more discretionary, which means that you get a lump sum and you've told them what you're going to do with it in your proposal, but they don't monitor you every 3 months. They don't have designed outcomes for you. I mean, you have to come up with outcomes that you're going to report to them, but the reporting tends to be annually or just at the end of the grant. And if you called them up and said, we need to move money from here to there because we found out that we didn't need as many staff, but we needed more stuff, they're a little bit more willing to work with you on making changes. The public program officers will do that as well to some degree, but there's usually a percentage limit. If you go over 20%, you can't just move money, from one place to another. You have to apply or write a letter to request it. So foundation funding is a little bit more flexible and a little bit more can be used for sort of more general types of things. I mean, not operating costs per se. It's still a programmatic type of request, meaning that there's a specific program that you're going to deliver. But it's a little bit easier to work with foundations in some ways than public funds. Yeah.
In another lifetime, a long time ago, I was assistant controller of the largest not-for-profit in Tulsa.
Oh.
And I learned very quickly, coming in from the business world to the not-for-profit world, that, and this is where it gets really difficult. If you get public funding rather than private funding, you have to be very specific about tracking. She talked about all the conditions upon which the funding is based. You have to structure your funding very carefully to make sure that if you're asking for administrative funds, payment of staff, or if you're asking for funds to buy capital expenditures or operating expenditures or supplies or whatever it happens to be, you have to keep very good accounting records, and you have to know which fund you're spending out of because they can come in and say, wait a minute, you spent this on capital expenditures, it was supposed to be spent on administration. You're not going to get, funding from them in the future on that, and you have to comply with that. Now, not everybody in this room, all their organizations, mine included, can't afford to have someone. And so one thing that I hope that will be addressed is what do we do about accounting resources? Someone who's got a background in fund or not-for-profit accounting that our organizations can gain access to help us in administration of funding. That's just a question for later, but while you were discussing the technicalities of public funding, I wanted to make sure that sometime today we address that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so public funding, if it's $100,000 or $500,000 something, I mean, you have to look at the capacity of your organization to handle it, and the funder is going to look at the capacity of your organization to handle those kinds of funds. And so it might not be appropriate for your organization to go for a National Science Foundation grant if you're interested in STEM, just because of the sheer amount of administration that's involved. So that's a very important consideration. Even as a community college, we're not a big research university, and I am it. And there's an accountant who works with me, and we have to be the administrators of all these grants. And there's some things that are beyond us to do, but we're trying to expand. And I always say I could use a little help. So I understand what you're saying. I think this is a good moment to have Laura say a little bit about the Nonprofit Center and the Foundation Online software.
So there's a couple of different services that we offer here. The one is the Foundation Directory Online. That's our main resource that we have for you. We pay so you can have access to that resource. The FDO. Yep. So that is available, but you may only access that while you are via our Wi-Fi on your own computer or on one of our own computers. So you can send and save profiles that way, and we will be having a class for that June 27th, which is a Saturday. If that's too far away for you, we also have Book a Librarians. So I know of several groups in here who have done that, and that is private one-on-one time that you would schedule with me, and we would review what your unique situation is, and using the keywords that we can come up with, we can send you home with a number of profiles that might be opportunities for you. So that is something you can book via our website. If you go to grundylibrary.org and you go to help, one of the helps is one of the services is Book a Librarian, and you can fill out that form.
Did you say grundylibrary.org?
Grundylibrary.org. Grundylibrary.org is also how you would access the Foundation Directory online via your own computer. So I do have a bookmark with our upcoming events, and there is a nonprofit area that does have books and other resources. And I also have a quick prize for people. I'm going to randomly select 2 people to go home with Grantmaker's Guide to Winning Grants. So these are from the Foundation Directory, and they're full of different proposals, so you can sort of get an idea of the numbers and different things that are there. But if you don't get one, don't worry. Grantspace grantspace.org is freely available for you to use at home, and that is the Foundation Directory's knowledge bank of information. There are videos you can watch free. There's articles you can read for free, and they do have sample proposals on that website as well.
So this is an incredible resource that the Grundy Library provides as a nonprofit center, and access to Foundation Directory Online. This is where you search for different foundations and learn about their priorities, get information about who's on their board of directors, get their contact information, sample grant proposals, different statistics about who's awarded in what areas, whether they tend to award new, at what percentage do they award new applicants versus continuing applicants, that kind of thing.
And it does have the government in there as well. It's not just private foundations.
Great.
It will have government grant opportunities as well as private.
So this is the place to be and to go. We're going to talk about how to do it, but when it comes down to doing the research, this is your first step, really, is getting acquainted with this database and with these resources to find out where good resources might be for your organization. So thank you so much, Laura. So let's just talk a little bit about what a good match would be. I mean, we've just segued into this. Where can I find the funders' priorities? We talked about online databases. The college uses something called Foundation Search, which is just a different database. But I recommend really taking advantage, now that you're here at Grundy and you're comfortable and familiar, take advantage of the resources Laura's describing and Laura herself. Grants.gov is the federal public online repository of all grants that are coming through legislation. And I believe, I don't know if you can gain access to grants.gov as an individual. You can?
You can't do everything, but they can at least see what's there. They may not be able to apply through that engine, but it does actually, you can read through the different.
Right, so grants.gov is definitely, then you'll see really what is out there in terms of big federal grants. Looking at what a funder has funded previously is helpful. As I said, sometimes foundations in particular shift their priorities over time. They may have listed that they were interested in funding. I use this example of animals. The college was interested in developing a veterinary tech program, and we wanted to look for some grant funding to help with the startup. And there was one foundation that listed that they had supported the Penn Vet School, University of Pennsylvania Vet School, and some other vet schools. And at a point where I actually did talk to the program officer of that foundation, I said, "Are you still doing that? Are you still supporting veterinary training programs?" And she said, that was one trustee's particular interest a long time ago. And, he had a particular connection to the University of Pennsylvania. And so we gave a few grants back, a decade ago. Not really what we're doing right now. But I wouldn't have known that if I didn't talk to her. So, again, you can even read what the priorities are, and they may have shifted. So really getting in touch with someone current, who's current working there is very helpful. But, you got to start somewhere. So, and as I said, communicate with the funder. I put a few, funny things here when you get the PowerPoint. You can read, good news, men, when we give money to the poor now, it will qualify for federal matching funds. So that's Robin Hood, thinking now about, sometimes with these big federal grants, they're going to give you $100,000, but you've got to come up with $50,000 to match it. So money is not always free. And so that, again, that has to do with your organizational capacity. So just quickly, where does your project fit? Who is the audience of reviewers? So the National Science Foundation has a bunch of reviewers that are connected to science and science education, research, that kind of thing. You have to think about who you're writing these grants, who's going to be reading them. There's a fine balance, and this is where grant writing is an art, really, between using language that indicates that you know the field. Words like sustainability and words like partnering, leveraging, those sorts of words are words that in the grant world indicate that that leveraging means we're going to get some money from the township that's going to match this grant, and together we can really deliver this program. That's leveraging funds. But you also don't want to use jargon, because some of these readers are not necessarily in the field that you're in, or in the direct service organization field that you're in, and you want your narrative to read just for somebody who can read it. It's good to have somebody who's not in your organization read your grant proposal sometimes and see if they understand what you're asking for, right? So who is the audience of reviewers? And then this is a very important tip. Why is this project important to fund now? And this is going to lead us into our exercise. It's very important that you give some background in your grant narrative, and sometimes they actually say, here's a question that we want the background to what this issue is, where you say, this is why it's important to fund us now in this place for this population. You have to be able to make that case. It's almost like, you know, being a persuasive lawyer or, you know, trying to advocate on behalf of your organization to really help those reviewers understand that we need this money now because this problem is taken off, like the opioid crisis, particularly, you know, in Bucks County and Philadelphia. That's a real problem now, and that's having a cascading effect on people's well-being that starts to, you know, go beyond treatment. It has to do with homelessness, has to do with mental health issues, you know, co-occurring disorders, whatever it might be. Why is it important now, I'm looking at you, you know, to fund this particular intervention, because it's really going to get worse if we don't do something about it now. So that's a very important part of your narrative. Doesn't have to take up a lot of space, but you want to really position yourself in what's relevant today and why that funding should come to you, and not next year, but right now. So I'd like to do an exercise with everybody. We have, our break is at 11:30, so we got a little bit of a late start. So I'm wondering if maybe we should work on the exercise, take the break, and then come back. The exercise I call see a need, fill a need. I don't know if any of you have children, grandchildren that love the movie Robots, but there was Bigwell, the robot, whose whole MO was, you know, we need inventors to find solutions to needs. And my daughter was really into the movie at the time that I did this presentation. But one of the things that makes for really powerful grant writing is if you really understand the problem that you're addressing and you define it in a way through research, through assessment of other programs and best practices in those kinds of interventions or solutions. What are others doing that's working? What is not being done where you are that needs to be done? If you can really connect all of those pieces together, it makes your story very, very powerful, because as we're going to find out, if you define the problem as one thing and you come up with a program as a solution or a way to address the program that doesn't really fit the way you define the problem, then there's going to be a disconnect in the reader's mind. So, you know, an example, let's start passing these out. So the example that we're doing here has to do with people need to find a living wage job to become self-sufficient. Yeah, we might need a few more over here. All right, so any more? Sure. Oh. Okay. Very good. Okay. Okay, great. Anyone else need one? You guys are good. Did you get one back there? Okay. All right. So let me give you an example of this quickly. Let's go like this. Okay. So people need to find living wage jobs to be self-sufficient. That's the problem statement. Living wage jobs, people need to find them. There's different ways to define what the problem is. What's the problem? Why aren't there living wage jobs?
Maybe they don't have a skill set.
So there's a gap in skills. Wages, let's see, wages low. What else could be the problem that there aren't living wage jobs?
Well, within the area, there might not be the industry
right? Lack of industry.
Industry has disappeared.
Jobs are changing, technology and many other stuff. And what they do is no needed anymore in a lot of places.
Right, so that's, what's the word, redundancy, I think?
Automation of low school. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Automation of low
Automation, right,
So robots.
Yeah.
right. So,
Supply and demand issues.
Fewer long, full-time jobs.
Internet.
I'm sorry about full-time, what is some?
There are fewer
Lack of
jobs.
full-time jobs.
Sorry.
Internet's taking over many jobs.
So internet, what do they call it, the gig economy?
Really a function of retraining or training.
Okay, so you all just came up with a huge amount of ideas about this. Let me ask you the difference between this one, and this one. Sorry about that. Lack of industry, meaning there just literally aren't factories, companies in the area that are providing jobs, versus gap in skills. Those are two different ways to look at the problem, right? One's curable. It depends on where you as an organization are fitting into this issue, right? If you are an organization that does skills training, including soft skills training and interview and resume, and or you're a workforce development organization that is training on a particular skill set, welding, industrial maintenance, those are some of the training programs we have, computer office skills, customer service skills. Is that going to be able to address the problem if you think that the real problem is that there is a lack of companies and industry in your area? If you define your problem as this and say, well, I want to do a program that helps build skills, there's a disconnect, right? If you were defining the problem this way, you would be more at the level of a township or a city, or a group of corporations, some sort of kind of coalition of groups, manufacturers that that work together as a group.
So no one's gonna fund you if you say that the problem is lack of industry, because there's nothing we can do about it.
So in your narrative, you want to make sure you try to connect. I mean, you can reference that that's a problem, but you really need to tie it into your reason for doing this. Yeah.
If you define it, if you've already tried, if somebody's defined the problem, what I guess our job would be is to come up with our proposed solution to the problem.
Depends, right? If the RFP is saying, here's what we think the problem is, particularly if it's government money, then you do have to find a way to tie your programmatic response.
Even if it is an RFP, if we see the need, and maybe the funder doesn't understand the need, we explain the need, but that explanation has got to be supported by the important writing is going to be what we're proposing to do about it, what we're going to retrain from the labor to the data operator and what have you.
Exactly. So yeah.
The lack of industry, I mean, Bristol just did this, right, with their funding. I mean, Laurie, you probably know about this, the whole, the Main Street revitalization. Yeah. Because basically the problem was there was no industry here that was sustaining the good paying jobs and bringing that culture of people wanting to come to Bristol to have lunch or whatever. So they went after the funding for that, right? And I'm assuming they're showing how that industry, like you rebuild a town, how you
Right, and what the economic growth model is for that. Yeah.
Funding. I mean, they got it, and they've
Yeah.
gotten several grants.
And I drove down Mill Street today, and I was delighted to see, all kinds of new shops and new restaurants, and just the whole entrance at Mill Street, the Mill Street crossing. I mean, that's new since I was here in 2002 and 2003.
And I'm assuming someone made that argument that they could correct the lack of industry for whatever purposes the grant they were going after.
Right. And
if they could just have the
funds to bring this in
Right.
and create this culture, right?
You have to be an organization that can work at that level if you're going to be using that kind of approach, right?
Yeah.
So you have to know yourself as an organization. You have to understand what the problem is and how your organization can, you don't have to solve it, but it's going to address a very important piece of it, right? So the importance, just like in English, when you're writing a paper, right? You've got a thesis statement. Your examples have to relate to that thesis statement or else you're writing a different paper, right? So with that, I would like you to work in your groups at your table and do your best to take this statement here that we just kind of fleshed through and decide how your group wants to approach it. What is the current situation that you intend to impact? So how are you defining the problem about finding living wage jobs for self-sufficiency? How do you define that problem? What kind of data would you try to find? What kind of assessments would you try to find that would put your problem statement in context? You know, what kind of research is out there that shows what this problem is? So why don't you try those first two? If we get to it, we'll get to number 3, but I would concentrate on the first 2 given the time, and we'll work until 11:30 for the break, and then we'll come back afterwards and we'll talk through what your ideas were. Okay? So as a group, I want you to, talk about the current situation, which is kind of this conversation we had here, but then how are you going to define that problem and what kind of information, data, research would you bring in to flesh out what that problem would be?
Are we thinking about this in terms of a specific type of job or just jobs?
You should decide what area you're looking at, what kind of jobs you're looking at. You all will come up with something different. So, yep.
Do you have a consensus on the identity of the organization that is applying?
Yeah, you have to decide what perspective you're going to do. So you could choose one of your own, or you could come up with, if none of you actually work in that area, or you do work in that area, you could go with that. But as a group, you need to first make that decision about what's our angle and what's our organization. Okay, did everybody hear that?
Focus on what we're looking for or what you were talking about?
Using this as an example, what you decide what you want to look for.
I mean, ours is not really industry, ours is more in the arts.
Right. So this, you could talk about the arts industry, or you could just do a hypothetical of somebody else's organization. We're just training you how to think this way, okay? So did everybody hear some of those tips that you have to decide on one kind of angle that you're going after this? It could be one of your organizations, or you could just make one up, but you're all writing in one voice here together. But on this particular problem. Living wage jobs.
Out of home to reach goals.
You guys clear where you need to go with this? It needs to be unified as a table, what direction you're taking. It could be your organization or a different organization. I want you to just get used to thinking this way, and you can apply it to your own organization later. Whatever works for the group. Okay, you've got about 20 minutes.
So,
They might be even adopted. Their idol is messed up in the mind, so they don't no, so we're gonna go take
social.
We're gonna try to assess what is the current situation, lack of good samples.
Lack of good adult Yeah, but you know, one of the things I have to teach how to be a man as an adult, how to take responsibility. The responsibility to give a job. I like that way, but then with spiritual, can't we go with more compassionate or
That does not mean that they don't already have a job.
everybody's spiritual, but you still have a conscience of what's right and wrong.
We do have spiritual feet.
Right.
The area to see what jobs are available.
Because we're talking
Lack
about
of
where
responsibility, lack of responsibility. Responsibility throwing up ballots.
You call and ask.
You're talking about needs of employers?
Well, yeah, because, you know, if they don't need high school workers, there's hardly any high school jobs. So you have to find out what jobs are actually available.
So that's part of your research and needs assessment, correct? Yep.
So how do you do that? You call them up
There's,
and ask.
there's also data, labor data on the census, and there's databases like our college has them, you know, that shows what what kinds of jobs are available in the area. Again, this has to do with the capacity of your organization to get a hold of that kind of research. But let's just say you have the capacity. You know, what would you look for?
We don't have any capacity.
Because then you just won't do it, right?
Well, what I was saying was that you have to, I mean, so the question for, I mean, now it's clear, you have to know how to research. So in my mind, one, I mean, there are many avenues, but one of them would be finding unemployment. Who are the people who keep going to unemployment, collect unemployment, and then never get a job? So the funds, they still can't get a job. So that would be, so they can't get a job for many reasons. One, they're not qualified, two, there aren't any jobs. So it would be to explore the unemployment statistics and see what's going on with that.
Yeah. You really have to know the landscape, because if you recommend something, as you say, and that industry is just left town. You know, at the college with our workforce development, we have very strong relationships with over 70 employers who tell us what they need, and they actually come to us and say, we need patient care technicians at Lower Bucks Hospital. Can you start a program? You know, but those relationships took a long time to establish, and you know, that's you're an educational institution. Yeah,
You can solve their problem. They don't look to solve their problem, so we have to go on and look online or what have you to find the answers to how many people are really need. I mean, I'm thinking of, you know, how many people are on stamps, or you know, like on you know, the programs, the electric companies, the gas companies,
right, the LIHEAP and
all that kind of stuff. Call them. I don't know if that data is
online, but to, contact those people, find out. That gives you an understanding of how many people in your area are, actually impacted by not being able to have enough money, at the end of the day in order to be able to pay those bills, or otherwise they wouldn't be on those programs. Because the electric company and all this, food stamps and all that kind of stuff, they establish, whether or not folks
Right,
have money to.
assuming that the data are available, some data is public. Excuse me, not the coronavirus, just working with a frog in my throat. So yeah, it has to be public data, and this is where going to a library would be very helpful, and talking to a librarian about, where do I gain access to this kind of information.
So we can work with the Grundy Library in order to be able
to do some research on, there could be government agency papers on, the state of the economy in Pennsylvania or something like that.
So we can just say that we have worked with the Grundy Library, even though we haven't done that yet. We can say, here's the resources that we worked with in order to establish the fact that 18% of all the local residents can't afford, can't afford to live on a job that they make.
So that's determining that there is a population that's under-financed, right? But what you also need to know what areas, what you were saying, what areas are looking for employees, because if you're designing a training program, or maybe that's not what you're designing, I don't know, you need to fit those areas. So you have to look at sort of general, or you can look at, there's reports and community hospitals sometimes print, sort of a state of affairs and, in their district. But what you're looking for is, one of the things employers say to us all the time is, we can train them, but they don't know how to show up on time. They don't, are they clean? Do they, have a work ethic? Do they? And so we actually build in a soft skills part of our training, how to dress, how to talk to people, how, sort of almost customer service.
How successful have you been? I've always wondered, because there's some who I've met who I don't
Well, it depends on, those are soft skills that you want for any kind of job, right? But it's tough, right? So maybe they should be doing something where they're not interfacing with people so much, or I don't know what. But you have to pick some population that you feel you can help, right? We know that there's people are living longer, so there's more need for health care. You have to look at the general trends. And there's also a turnover in skilled workers too. That people need people who can weld and people who can do basic infrastructure work or whatever it might be. So, but you need to find out, and it's not just by talking to employers. There's data, there are studies, there are statements that are made. Yeah. So, in talking to the librarian, you don't tell a funder that you've gone to the library. You tell the funder, here are the statistics and here's the source, right? So that's how you build that section. You don't have to have, you're not writing a dissertation, but you do need to show that you've done your research, that you understand your area. But knowing that there are people in need is also important, right? So that's a fundamental place to start. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. Great. You guys doing okay? No? Okay. So where are you hitting a snag?
Are we supposed to be creating a group and then saying, okay, we're in this group and we're going to focus on this problem, or are we supposed to be taking a problem that we see as a problem and creating a solution?
You're working on this. People need to find living wage jobs, and if none of you have a group that does that, then you have to imagine a group. Yeah. This is a thought exercise. This afternoon we'll do an exercise that might be closer to your organization. But just in general today, it's about the skills to do it. Okay, so don't worry about question 3. You guys doing okay? Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. You guys moving along? Okay. Good. Good. Okay. They're doing okay, I think. You guys doing okay? Yeah? Okay, we got about 5 more minutes, and then we'll take a break.
I hate to say non-filtered.
I wrote down social media on bad and wrong information. Does that make sense?
Okay, everybody, we've got about 5 more minutes, so you want to just wrap up numbers 1 and 2 to have something to report out. 5 minutes.
Data assessment, internet research, and also programs that projects. I have issues spelling a lot of times. My brain still expands a lot of ways.
Oh, actually, we should break now, right? It was 11:20 that we wanted to break. Okay, everybody, let's wrap up. Let's take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll just report out what you got when you come back, okay? 10 minutes, so 11:35. We're a little bit off schedule, but that's okay. Okay, time for a break. They're still working. That's great. Yeah, yeah.
6 separation. So we're 1.
You can have a break now. I know, that's awesome. That's great. Okay, you guys, you can take your break now. I love that you're still working though. That's good. Okay, you guys, you can take your break now.
That's part of the problem. You already have no resources probably at home with the phone or the computer, and the school will teach you in front of the class.
Yeah, but I just feel that time for the social work. All my
That's how it started. Where the money is, especially if you're not. Right. That's not.
It just occurred to me, but I started
Yeah, I know.
the way I approach it from, say, the chamber orchestra, look, we ought to be able to do what we have. We actually got a grant from the Bucks County Tourism. Because a good chamber orchestra should make sure that we have people coming in from other counties or I can go after organizations that are dedicated to the preservation or conservation of classrooms. Or we can go after education for music education.
A page or something
Or
where we give our personal
we can
information and say, go ahead. The people that are doing
proven fact kids
You should ask Laura. I don't know if she does share the participant list, but yeah.
we could look into that, it might be easier to have it in one
I'm
place.
just saying
Yeah.
we need to establish some kind of connection because
Yeah.
everybody can chip in here.
Yeah.
I already know resources that is saying, oh, I would like to have a little bit of what she knows, probably. You know?
Oh, absolutely.
Network marketing is mainly where it comes
That's
together.
it is. It
Yes,
is
yes,
absolutely.
yes, yes.
People can give you tips
Yeah,
and
yeah,
say
and
you should
because-
talk to so and so.
Yes, these people have the program.
It still works that way. You know, we have the internet, but it's still people to people, in my view.
Yeah. I really think so.